مم.
انت كنت زراعة الليلة فيك مجاعة. انت كنت زراعة الليلة فيك مجاعة. يا سودان من وين لوين؟ الحالة دي حتم لمتين يا سودان من وين لوين؟ ديل حكامك سووا الشين. يا سودان الحب تلقاه، يا سودان الحب تلقاه، ويوما يا حبيب أولادك يرجعوا لك من الغربة. يا سودان الحب تلقاه، يا سودان الحب تلقاه، ويوما يا حبيب أولادك يرجعوا لك من الغربة. يا سودان معلش كموك ناس الجيش، انت ما بتستاهل تكون كده. يا سودان معلش كموك ناس الجيش، انت ما بتستاهل الظلم ده. انت كنت زراعة الليلة فيك مجاعة. انت كنت زراعة الليلة فيك مجاعة. يا سودان ما تبقى خراب، في حروبك ضاعوا شباب. يا عيونهم ماتوا ما بقى عذاب، حيرانة تسأل عن أسباب. يا سودان الحب تلقاه، يا سودان الحب تلقاه، ويوما يا حبيب أولادك يرجعوا لك من الغربة. يا سودان الحب تلقاه، يا سودان الحب تلقاه، ويوما يا حبيب أولادك يرجعوا لك من الغربة. يا سودان الحب تلقاه، يا سودان الحب تلقاه، ويوما يا حبيب أولادك يرجعوا لك من الغربة. أشواقي ولمتين العودة أنا أشوف ولاقي بلدي جميل أي وساقيه النيل لمتين أزورك يغمرني نورك بلدي المحبوب فيك أحلى غروب ما شافوا الباقيين بس مشوار في ترابك أحلم بغسلي برد الغربة قاسي بيذكر
Hello, greetings. We hope you are well today. Hope you are at your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual strength. We want to definitely welcome you to this week's episode of Our Ancestors' Voices, a program sponsored weekly, same time, same platforms by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And of course, we start this program today paying tribute to our wonderful sister, Asata Shakur, who made her physical transition on Thursday at 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time. And we of course, dedicate this program today to our sister Asata and the legacy of struggle that she represents. And we just want to contextualize it by reminding everyone that Sister Asata Shakur never sought to make peace with the capitalist system. She never sought to integrate into it. She did no work to create positions within it. She d- engaged in no compromise to fulfill herself with this backward system. She preached constantly the necessity for us to organize to create a better reality for us as African people and for all of humanity, and that none of that could include this backward U.S. empire capitalist system. So a lot of people are out here now and paying tribute to her and trying to make her into some sort of American icon. That was not what she was, and we refused to let people do that. She was an African freedom fighter who was fighting for African liberation. She was a part of the New African Independence Movement. And if you don't know what that is, then you should find out if you're going to have Asada Shakur's name in your mouth. And so that's who she was, and that's who we honor today and every day. If you have participated in this program, you know that we've done multiple programs on Sister Asada. So we're not some of these join the bandwagon late type people. We have known about our sister's contributions for decades since the 1970s. And Shakura can tell you she was raised understanding who people like Asada Shakur are and how she should live her life in honor to their sacrifices. So we honor and respect our sister Asada today. And we know that the best way to do that is to continue to do the work that she made so many sacrifices to do. So we continue that today, of course, with the topic of this program, from Africa to Alabama to Oakland, the birth of the Black Panther Party. From Africa to Alabama to Oakland, the birth of the Black Panther Party. And of course, most people know of the Black Panther Party that started in October 1966 in West Oakland, California, US. Just not too many minutes from where I am right now. And that you should know about the contributions of the originally the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, founded by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale in Oakland in 1966. But you should also know that everything is a part of a continuum. So the Black Panther Party, founded in Oakland in October 1966, was actually the outgrowth of events that happened a year before that in Alabama, and that's what we'll be talking to you about today. And before that, the Black Panther Party in Alabama and in California was certainly influenced by liberation movements on the African continent. So that's the basis of how we approach today's program, because we are a part of that African continuum and we will always be a part of that. And Sister Asada Shakur is a part of that. And anyone dedicated to justice and forward movement and liberation is a part of that. So we honor the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere because, speaking of justice, they deserve justice. They deserve justice. And justice looks like them reclaiming and having these lands that were stolen from them. You know, these are their lands, all of the Americas, from the state of Alaska in the northernest part of the hemisphere all the way down to Chile in the southernest part of the hemisphere and everything in between. Canada, the United States of America, all of the countries in Central America, Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Belize, Honduras, all of those countries, and everything in the Caribbean, Jamaica, Haiti, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, the Virgin Islands, the Bahamas, etc., and so forth, and every aspect of South America, Brazil, Colombia, Chile, as we mentioned, all of these countries, Uruguay, all of them, Grenada, all of these lands belong to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And they have a right to fight to get these lands back, and we are with them in that fight. It's theirs, they have a right to it, and they will have that returned to them one day soon. And we also give honor and respect to our African ancestors. Of course, Sister Asata Shakur is one of those now, one of those ancestors that we live to do this work for. And Kwame Ture said it best years ago when he was still in his physical form, when he said that the best way to pay tribute to someone is to continue their work. Nobody cares, you know, if you have a relationship with someone and they just keep talking about how wonderful you are, but they don't do anything for you. You're never they're never available to support you. They're never available when you need them. Then after a while, them just constantly talking about how wonderful you are, that won't mean anything to you. That'll mean zero to you. What will mean something to you is if that person is constantly prioritizing being there, being a part of your life, being a part of your life to support you and help you move forward in your life goals. So that's what Kwame meant when he said the best way to honor someone is to continue their work. So, you know, we don't when we lose a freedom fighter like Sister Sata Shakur in the physical form, we don't sit around and lament and talk about all this nonsense. We just continue to do the work that she was dedicated to doing. And part of that work is understanding that you're going to see a lot of these hit pieces come out now. You know, the FBI never stops. They've never stopped attempting to soil Assata Shakur's image, soil the image of the Black Panther Party and everybody in it. They've never stopped doing that. They continue to do that to this day. And every organization fighting against this empire, they continue to do that every day. So you're going to see all of these attacks. I read one earlier today talking about how, you know, a couple of things that they're saying. One is trying to put the suggestion in your head that Sister Asata had softened her politics. That's one of the attacks that's being waged. The other attack that's being waged is to either dismiss or discredit the role of the socialist Cuban revolution in keeping Assata Shakur safe for 41 years. That's the other effort that's being made. You know, all kind of people are talking about it, but people aren't talking about the role of the Cuban Revolution. She was in Cuba all these years for a reason. That was the safest place on the planet for her to be, and it has always been the safest place as a refuge for revolutionaries to go to because it's a revolutionary country. And so we want to honor, and we will never forget those of you who, when Obama's administration was trying to negotiate to get Assata extradited back here so that she could go back to prison. And many of you were like, oh, yeah, I knew that was going to happen. You didn't know a goddamn thing because Cuba sat there through the person of Raul Castro and told Obama to his goddamn face that even if you offer us Carlos Posada Corrales, who was a CIA backed puppet terrorist living in Miami and killed dozens of people in Cuba to terrorize them against the Cuban Revolution. They told Obama, even if you offer us Posada Corrales, even if you tell us, as they did, that we'll talk to you about lifting the 60 plus year uh, economic blockade against Cuba, we will not discuss extraditing Sister Asada Shakur. In a quote, that is not on the table. And Cuba could have benefited in so many ways if they'd have been like a lot of you and just sold out Assata just for their own individual interests. And the Cuban Revolution didn't do that. And so we are not going to let you people that dismissed them and said that they would do that forget that we remember that you said that and that they never did compromise. Even though they could have benefited handsomely had they done so, they never compromised. They kept our sisters safe, just like they had all of our other freedom fighters, from Robert Williams to Huey P. Newton to Eldridge Cleaver to all of the Africans who went there. Fidel Castro said at the United Nations that if one hair on the head of Stokely Carmichael is harmed, then imperialism will never rest. And this is the type of people that the Cuban Revolution has produced for the last 60 plus years. It's also the type of people that Fidel Castro is as the leader of the socialist revolution in Cuba. And so we will never stop giving them the roses and the credit that they deserve as freedom fighters for and always willing to stand up for our people. So we honor Sister Asata and we introduce this program as we always do. Our Ancestors' Voices is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, APRP, and the APRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass Pan African political party based in Africa. And our objective is Pan Africanism, which we define correctly as one unified socialist Africa. And our work to achieve Pan Africanism is outlined in Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, the cover that you see on this page. And Our Ancestors' Voices is hosted each week, same time, same place, all the time, for the last 5 years by myself, Ajamu, and my biological and ideological daughter, Shakura, now Dr. Shakura Umi, who we are both active organizers within the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So, again, we pay tribute today to our sister Assata Shakur. And what better topic to do that than our topic for today's program? From Africa to Alabama to Oakland the legacy of the Black Panther Party. So to get us started, I will turn it over to Dr. Umi. I don't know if Shakur is having, she had some audio problems before, so that might be happening again. So I'll just get us started, and then when she comes back, she can jump right in. So we wanted to start by just talking about the Africa influence, right? And the picture you have on your screen is of Didan Kamati, who was one of the founders of the land and freedom movement in Kenya, who were better known as the Mau Mau. And the Mau Mau were a group of guerrilla fighters who fought against the British colonizers in Kenya. They waged a war against them, a military battle against them. And they were able to successfully take out dozens of European colonizers in Kenya between the late 1950s and the early 1960s. And they did it in guerrilla fashion. And if you have ever read the writings of Huey P. Newton, who was clearly the ideological direction, provided the ideological direction for the Black Panther Party in Oakland, founded in Oakland, he talked extensively in revolutionary suicide and the other, I can't remember, my mind is slipping for some reason. The other book that he wrote during the same period of the early 70s, where he talked about the impact of the land and freedom movement, of the Mau Mau movement, on the Black Panther Party. So this is one example that we give to illustrate um, Africa's influence on creating liberation organizations like the Black Panther Party. The struggle for liberation from African people in this country did not exist in a vacuum. It was heavily influenced by the independence movements in Africa, as well as the brutal murder of Emmett Till, 14-year-old Emmett Till in Money, Mississippi in 1955. But these events certainly led to the flame of resistance, that led to the civil rights movement in this country. And in order to properly understand the reaction to Emmett Till's murder, you have to understand our spirit of resistance, which has always existed, right? And contrary to a lot of current misinformed narratives, Africa developed proud civilizations with great dignity. And because these civilizations had such dignity, of course, they constantly resisted colonialism, slavery, and oppression. And if somebody seeing this doesn't know that history, you got work to do. Just close your mouth. Don't stop talking and do the work so you can understand it. So you can understand the resistance of people like the Kakongo people along the central coast in Africa, the Labodi in Ghana, the Kikuyu in East Africa, the Oromo in the Horn area of Africa, the Mandinka, the Wolof, etc., 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 the Akan. All of these folks resisted colonialism intensely. Intensely, they resisted it. So when people say things like, well, nobody in Africa did anything to help us over here, like that's just someone that doesn't know the history. And it's our responsibility to, in a very caring and nurturing way, steer them to knowing their history, that we always resisted. And as I mentioned, the land and freedom movement in Kenya influenced the Black Panther Party. The struggle against racist apartheid by our liberation movements in Azania, the African National Congress, the Pan Africanist Congress of Azania, the Azanian People's Organization, the Black Consciousness Movement, all of the movements for liberation in Azania, South Africa, influenced the movement here in this country, the creation and the implementation of the Black Panther Party. This is without question. Malcolm X, of course, had a major influence on the Black Panther Party, and Malcolm, certainly in the last year of his life, was overwhelmingly influenced by the liberation movements in Africa. He named his newly founded Organization of Afro American Unity, to connect it to the Organization of African Unity that Kwame Nkrumah founded. the year before Malcolm founded his organization. And of course, we know a lot more now than we did then. But the point is that there's no question from anyone who has uh, studied history and understands history, there's no question whatsoever that Africa played a central role in influencing any element of militant struggle within this society. Played a central role. I mean, you don't think that when Frantz Fanon got up at the All African People's Conference in Ghana in December of 1958, and up to that point, everybody was talking about peaceful, negotiated independence from Europe. All the people getting up to talk at the All African People's Conference were talking about that, like how we can work with Europe for our independence. And here comes Frantz Fanon, who came from the Caribbean and was working actively with the Algerian Revolution in North Africa. And he gets up there and he talks about the theories that Fanon articulated in the books that he wrote, Black Skin, White Mask, towards colonial freedom and wretched of the earth, etc. And he talked about how we have a responsibility to our future generations to exist on a plane of dignity. And what that meant, as he articulated it, is as violent as these people have been towards us, we have the responsibility to put everything on the table and utilize any tactic that's going to be effective, no matter what that tactic is, to bring about our liberation. And that changed the entire tenor of the All African People's Conference after Fanon's speech. And it also changed the tenor of the entire African independence movement after that. And this, of course, led to greater support for groups like the Land and Freedom Movement or the Mau Mau movement. And all of this influenced Africans here in the U.S. And so, this is important for us. Like Nkrumah talks about, we are Africans not because we were born in Africa, but because Africa is born in us. And this is a quote that I know Shakura likes to use often, and it's very important because if you think about it, what it's saying is that we never are apart from our African identity. That's never separate from anything that we do. So we know that the most well-known segment of the Black Panther Party was the segment that emerged in Oakland, California in 1966, as we said. And that party, founded by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, it didn't consider itself a Pan-African party. And a correct understanding of the anti-colonial nature of our culture and struggle as African people tells us that since we were stolen from Africa, forced into the Western Hemisphere, and viciously exploited here for centuries, our culture could never be that of quote unquote Black people fighting for equality in the capitalist US. That could never be the definition of who we are. This capitalist system was built on our backs. So we could never properly define ourselves as strictly being the products of this society. We were not produced by this society. Our problems didn't start in this society. This society is a manifestation of the problems we've experienced the last 500 plus years. So it just makes sense that we would see that and understand that we have to be connected to Africa. That's where the problem started. So in our humble in our humble analysis, we are convinced that that's the only way the problem will be solved is by looking at our mother, looking at Mother Africa. And that's what Pan Africanism means, essentially. So instead, what we say is our culture is African people in the US who continue to struggle for our dignity, which is the highest expression of African culture, even if we never go to Africa. That's not the point. Or we know nothing about her. That's not the point. The point is everything that we do is a part of us being Africans and a part of our African culture, which has never been a part of this capitalist society. In fact, as Kwame Ture articulated, our struggle is one of being African struggling against capitalism here in the Western Hemisphere. That's what our culture is. And the way I've always understood that, because I understood that as a child, even though I couldn't articulate it the way I just did, the way I understood that was when I was in high school and we were wearing afros in the late 70s. And we used to have what we call cake cutters, were the combs. Those of you that you can Google it if you don't know what that is, but they were Afro pick combs. And a lot of them at that time were being sold with black fists on the handle. And so we would we weren't conscious of it. You know, we were kids, but we would stick the cake cutters in our afro with the black fist sticking up. It was just for me doing it, it was just a fad thing that everybody was doing that was cool. And the schools begin to ban us being able to bring cake cutters to the school. And nobody was using, like they said that, these the the blades or whatever you call them on the device were, they were stunted. So it weren't sharp or anything, or else you cut your head when you combed your hair with it. So that wouldn't make any sense. So, I guess some people may have tried to use them as weapons, but you can use anything as a weapon. You can take your belt off and use that as a weapon, and nobody's going to outlaw belts. But they tried to outlaw the cake cutters, tell us we couldn't bring them to school. And of course, there was a big uproar, not only from us as young students, but our families, because we used those to comb our hair. And I understood as a child, like as a teenager, then, like, this is an assault against us as a people. They're basically saying that we can't be who we are. And just the simple act of us combing our hair is a threat to this backward ass society. I understood that then. And there are all types of examples like that. But that's the point that, when we say we're African people. And we know that even within the Black Panther Party, everything I just said was a struggle, right? And thinking about Sister Asada Shakur, she articulated that in her autobiography, Asada. She talked about how the Panthers in New York were built a little differently. They were much more in tune with Pan African struggles. A lot of them have participated in Pan African struggles. David Brothers, for example, who was the chairperson of the Brooklyn Black Panther Party in the late 60s, went on to become a part of the All African People's Revolutionary Party and served on the Central Committee for the APRP until uh, till he physically made his transition in 2007. And there were others. Of course, Kwame Ture obviously was a Black Panther who uh, moved forward to Pan Africanism, and there were others. Bob Brown was another one, founded the Illinois chapter and helped recruit Fred Hampton into the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. Went on to become active in the APRP and is still alive and active today in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, GC. And Sekou Neblet, who's my big brother who I stay with whenever I go to Ghana, same thing, active in the APRP these days, and was a field marshal for the Black Panther Party. So the Pan African element was there, and Asada talked about that in her autobiography about how some people from the Oakland office came into the office in I think it was Harlem, Black Panther Party office, and she talks about in the book how they were telling them to take the African Liberation Day poster down and that was hanging in the office. And, she didn't understand that. And the comrades there in Harlem didn't understand it. And, this was, some of the contradictions in the Black Panther Party that, a lot of the people in the New York chapter of the Black Panther Party, uh, dismissed their European names, took on African names. Obviously, Asada was one of them. Zaid Shakur, his brother Lumumba Shakur, Sundiata Acoli, and many of the others there in the New York Black Panther Party chapter did that. They were much more in tune with their African identity. So this is just, important for us to see it in that broader context. So continuing on, let's talk about the history of the Black Panther Party in Alabama. right? We've talked about how the role of Africa in the African independence movements and African culture contributed. Now let's talk about what happened in Alabama. So what happened is in 1964, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, helped organize the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which was a project in Mississippi to force the Democratic Party to allow us to participate because we were not permitted to register to vote. When Africans would register to vote in Mississippi in 1964, they would be met with violence. They would be fired. Miss Fannie Lou Hamer, for example, she suffered being beat for just simply attempting to register to vote, having her where she and her husband lived, having her living quarters burned to the ground. He was fired from his job. Their crops were destroyed just because she attempted to register to vote. Their place was shot up multiple times. And so the MFDP, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, was a project of SNCC to challenge this injustice, especially since the 15th Amendment of your U.S. Constitution, and I say yours because it's not mine, it's not yours either, but some of you love to claim this cracker graham cracker system and its institutions. So it allowed African men to vote in 1870, although it was never enforced. That's why they had to pass the Voting Rights Act in 1965, and that's not enforced today in 2025. There's still so many efforts to there's wide allegations of inappropriate handling of African votes in the 2024 election. So, it's still a thing. And then Women's Suffrage Act passed, and African women didn't benefit from any of those. So, this is why SNCC organized this project. And what happened is that they were organized enough so that they forced the National Democratic Party, which at that time was led by this man, Hubert Humphrey, who was the Democratic Party's nominee for president in 1964. They had the convention in the summer of 1964 in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And what SNCC did and what the MFDP did leading up to that convention is they forced the National Democratic Party to recognize their delegates. Now, up to that point, delegates were all white men at the Democratic and Republican national committees. There were no women, there were no colonized people, nowhere to be found in any of that. And what happened is that SNCC blew that wide open with the work of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. But these crackers are not. I mean, they still, even though the MFDP played by all the rules, they won fair and square. They refused to seat them for all the delegates that they should have been allowed to seat, and they had to have this compromise. And a lot of people felt that the compromise was the best they could do, including Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So SNCC had to accept that, and they got a couple of seats at the convention, but they weren't even voting seats. But what it did do is it broke apart permanently this white male dominance of the electoral process in this society. So if you're not a white man and you've ever participated in electoral politics, this is the work that you need to thank for being able to do that. So that's what happened. But what SNCC learned from the work in Mississippi in 1964 is that there was no power in it for our people. There was nothing. We from a tangible standpoint, all the work that happened with the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party in 1964, it gave us a lot of visibility, but it didn't give us any power, right? We weren't even able to seat the delegates that we should have been able to seat. So SNCC went the next year to Alabama in 1965. And instead of organizing a project like the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party that was designed to force the Democratic and the Republican parties in the capitalist electoral process to accept us, SNCC had a different focus. They wanted to build an independent African political party in Lowndes County, Alabama. And so some people had started the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, and SNCC connected to them and said, let's work together and let's build that independent party. And so they had a plan and a vision, and they proliferated the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, or the LCFO. And they did that with the understanding that they would build an independent model, different from what they did the year before in Mississippi. Now, the Republican Party had a animal as a symbol. One of them had a donkey, one of them had a rooster. I think the Democratic Party's symbol in Alabama was a rooster, and it said on it for white supremacy. And of course, the Republican Party had the donkey, and they were for white supremacy. So SNCC knew that they would be able to convince our people like we can't belong to either one of these parties, so we have to start our own. So the effort to start the Lowndes County Freedmen Organization was met enthusiastically by the people, the African people in Alabama, and because 8 out of 10 people in Lowndes County were not able to read and write, they knew just like the Democratic and Republican Party, they had to come up with a symbol. So they chose the Black Panther because the Black Panther was is an animal that if it won't initiate an attack, but it will fight you to the death if you corner it. And that's how they saw themselves in Lowndes County at that time. So they started it. And because the violence against African people by the Ku Klux Klan and law enforcement, who, they were the same thing, just like they are today, they knew that if they launched this Lowndes County Freedom Organization, they were going to be met with violence. So they had to arm themselves. Like you see in the picture there, they had to arm themselves. They had assistance from the Deacons for Defense and Justice, and they were able to arm themselves for this work because at this point, SNCC had come to the realization that unlike Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and Bayard Rustin and the people in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SNCC people were on the ground every day in Mississippi and Alabama with no news cameras present. That was not the uh, reality for Dr. King and the work that he did. And this not throwing shade at Dr. King. We've said a million times we respect Dr. King, but Dr. King was a mobilizer. He was not an organizer. And SNCC engaged in organizing work. Their work was to build up organizations like the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. And this was done under the headlights. They were working in extremely dangerous conditions. So there was no way it could be publicly known what they were doing. They would have been subjected to violent attack had that been the reality. These were not the conditions that Martin Luther King did his work. He wanted to mobilize huge events to bring attention to segregation. Huge events like the March on Washington and the Edmund Pettus Bridge and all the great marches and events in the Oregon. You wanted media there. It was above ground. It was an event. And then he would go somewhere else. Where SNCC was building institutions like the MFDP and the LCFO in Mississippi and Alabama, respectively. And they had to do that working with the community and not working so that the racists could see them. So they armed themselves, just so that they could be, because the county was so violent, Lowndes County, they called it Bloody Lowndes. And so they had no hesitation about arming themselves. And if you look at the picture again, you see one of their campaign signs. You see the brother with the rifle, shotgun standing there. You see the Black Panther in the picture. And so, because again, a lot of people were not literate, the organization became more popularly known. Instead of being known as the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, it became more popularly known as the Black Panther Party in Lowndes County, Alabama. And with every SNCC project, people came from all over the country to participate in SNCC work. And one of the people who came to Alabama to work with the Lowndes County Freedom Organization or the Black Panther Party there was a young activist from Oakland, California named Mark Comfort. And Mark Comfort was known to Huey P. Newton. They knew each other. They had engaged each other in some work in Oakland. So Mark Comfort did work in Lowndes County. And then, like what would always be the case with SNCC projects, when the summer ended, the people would go back to their respective areas. So Mark Comfort went back to Oakland and ran into Huey P. Newton and told him, dude, where you been? I've been in Alabama. There's some black people there with a political party called the Black Panther Party, and they got guns. They're arming themselves. And this was, 1965. So this was inspiring to people to see this. And Huey P. Newton took it, and with Bobby Seale, that's how they decided. That's what we need to do. We need to organize a party that's armed, and we need to call it the Black Panther Party. And you can verify this because in Huey Newton's that's the book. I couldn't remember it earlier. To Die for the People. He wrote two books around the early 70s, Revolutionary Suicide and To Die for the People. Some people call Revolutionary Suicide his autobiography. I've read them both. I think both of them basically serve that purpose. But in those books, he talks about how he wrote Kwame Ture, who was Stokely Carmichael then and was the chair of SNCC, and asked him if they could use the name. And Kwame Ture, of course, told us many times in person, but he also wrote it in his autobiography, Ready for the Revolution, that he responded to Huey P. Newton. They didn't know each other yet. They would come to know each other shortly after that, but he responded to Huey P. Newton and he told him, the name belongs to the people, so use it as you wish. And so that, clearly that's what happened, where the Oakland Black Panther Party was heavily influenced, of course, by Africa. Groups like the Land and Freedom Movement, the Mau Mau, and liberation movements in Southern Africa, but also, of course, by the work the previous year in Alabama with the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, the Black Panther Party, an armed political party fighting for independent African liberation. That's what it was. And so this was, it's very important to build these ties because in 1967, 68, there was an effort to bring unity between the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and the Oakland originated Black Panther Party. And this effort was largely handled by Eldridge Cleaver, who became the Minister of Information for the Black Panther Party. And, frankly, just brought a lot of problems into the Black Panther Party because of, where he was and his mindset and, what he wanted to do and what was important to him at that time. Huey P. Newton, who I would argue was the ideologue, the chief ideologue for the Black Panther Party, was in jail. He had been arrested based on the August 28th, 1967 shootout on the streets of Oakland, where a police officer, a racist police officer, John Frey, was killed when he pulled over Huey P. Newton and another passenger. Um, Gene, I'm sorry, my brain is blinking out. I'm tired today. Sorry about that. Gene McKinney. Gene McKinney was in the car with Huey P. Newton. And there was a shootout, and Frey was killed. Huey P. Newton was injured, and Haynes, who was the officer who was holding on to Gene McKinney, he was injured as well. And so Huey P. Newton went to jail. So he was in jail during that time, and this effort was made, and there was never any real unification between SNCC and the Black Panther Party. But Kwame Ture, who was Stokely Carmichael, was recruited into the Black Panther Party as the prime minister of the Black Panther Party. James Foreman was recruited and given a title in the Black Panther Party, and Jamil Abdul Alameen, who was H. Rap Brown, and who at that time was the chair of SNCC after Kwame Ture, was also drafted into the Black Panther Party and took on a title. So this is what happened. And the SNCC people had already had plenty of experience building a national organization. So they were very helpful to the Black Panther Party, who at that time, there were a couple of things that proliferated the growth of the Black Panther Party. Obviously, the arrest and imprisonment of Huey P. Newton, and then also, the work to make it a national organization beyond just California and beyond just the West Coast. So that's the history there that influenced what happened in Oakland. And then you had, of course, what most of us are aware of, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense in Oakland. And we mentioned Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale sought out Kwame Ture and asked permission to use the name. But what happened with the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense is in October 1966, there were six of them who formed that party in the backyard of Huey P. Newton's mother in house in West Oakland. And so it was Huey P. Newton, it was Bobby Seale, it was little Bobby Hutton, who was, about 16 at that time. There were the Forte brothers, Warren and Reggie Forte, and then there was Big Man, Brother Howard. So the six of them were the original Black Panther Party for self-defense members in Oakland. And there's a picture. I have it on my wall. It's too small for you to see it, but it's behind me here. A picture of the six of them posing in Huey P. Newton's mother's backyard in October of 1966. And what the Panther Party did is they began to do patrols throughout the Bay Area. And they began to do these patrols that were designed to follow the police around because of the rampant police terrorism against African people. So these Black Panther Party folks would get in the car, and there were only a handful of them then, and they would follow the police around. And they would, when the police would pull over our people, which that's what they were there to do, these Panthers would get out, and Huey P. Newton had studied law. He had been a law student, so he understood legal defense. So they would stand there with these guns. At that time, guns were legal to carry in the state of California, and he would recite to the people what their rights were. The police would tell him, "Give me your ID," and he would tell them, "You don't have to give me your ID until there's an articulable crime that they suspect you of being committed, and they have to have reasonable suspicion that's reasonable to a reasonable person in this society. So if they haven't articulated to them, you ask them, what crime are you accusing me of committing? And if they tell you they don't have one, you tell them, am I free to go? And you walk away." That's what Huey P. Newton would yell at the Africans there while they were holding guns. And the police would be like, "What do you do with those guns?" And Huey would be like, "What are you doing with yours?" And if you know that history, they were asked by the uh, folks who were rallying around Sister Betty Shabazz, the widow of Malcolm X, who had come to San Francisco. And there was a magazine called the Ramparts magazine, which Eldridge Cleaver worked at. He was not yet a member of the Black Panther Party, but they wanted to host Dr. Betty Shabazz, and they asked the Panthers to provide security for her. And again, you got to realize there were a number of people around the world, really, especially around this country, who were inspired by what SNCC did in Alabama in 1965 with the Lowndes County Freedom Organization and the Black Panther Party, as it was more popularly known in Alabama in 65. So there were a number of groups that rose up who were using the name Black Panther Party. So, like the Black Panther Party for self-defense started in Oakland, there was another group in San Francisco started by a gentleman named Khalid Al Mansour, who at that time was known as Donald Warden. And he used to have a weekly program on KDIA radio that, my father grew up listening to every Sunday that I used to listen to. But this African's organization was called the Black Panther Party for Northern California. And so there were a number of groups like that. And so what the folks who were hosting Dr. Betty Shabazz did, or, she was Betty Shabazz then, is they asked all of these groups to come and do security. And what happened is, of course, Huey and their group, they went and they took their guns, and their guns were loaded. And these other folks came and they brought guns, but they weren't loaded. And so there was a standoff at the San Francisco airport because these Africans had these guns, even though guns were legal. There was no 9/111 or whatever the hell it was. There was none of that. So at that time, you could, without a ticket, go into the airport and go right up to the gate. And so that's what the Panthers did with the guns, to wait for Betty Shabazz to get off the plane so that they could perform their self-defense duties. And so if someone called the police, of course, all these Africans with guns, and this caused the standoff, and that's where the reporter, the Panthers were walking with Betty Shabazz, the Black Panther Party for self-defense people. The other people were kind of there, but they weren't like in it like Huey Newton and his people. And they were walking with uh, Betty Shabazz, and Dr. Betty Shabazz told Huey, I please, I don't want any pictures. And so there was a photographer, a news media person who was bogarting as they do, and trying to get pictures and asking, Dr. Shabazz questions. And Huey he had a white envelope. He took it and he put it in front of the camera. And the European photographer knocked the envelope away, and Huey put it up again. And the European knocked it away again. And the second time he did it, Huey knocked the shit out of him, knocked him to the ground, broke the camera and everything. And so the European stood up and told the police who were there, "You got to arrest him. You got to arrest him." And so the Panthers squared off with the cops. The cops were there, the Panthers there, the media filmed it. There's a video on YouTube somewhere. I haven't been able to find it lately, but it's there. It was a part of the Eye on the Prize series. If you have Eye on the Prize, you can see it. Everything I just described in actual documentary form. But they were yelling at the police to arrest the Black Panther Party for self-defense members. And when they went to move, Huey told them spread out, surround the police. And he told them, don't take your eyes off those savage pigs. And Huey jacked around, that shotgun he's holding jacked around into the chamber. And the cops were like, whoa. And that was, they filmed that. It was in the media. So this is where the Black Panther Party for self-defense really began to gather this reputation. But a lot of that was because of the fearlessness and the courage of Huey P. Newton. I mean, just to be honest, the courage and the vision that he had. This was an African that wasn't ever a huge man, but his courage was limitless. And we need to learn something from that, because these people had all this courage. Sister Asada Shakur, Huey P. Newton, El Haj Malik, El Shabazz, all these folks had all this courage. Carmen Piera, Teodora Gomez, and you Negroes today, you don't have enough courage to put in a thimble. You're scared of every goddamn thing. Worthless, absolutely worthless. The minute they come and tell you, if you say that, you're gonna have to pay a con. I change. I ain't gonna say nothing to upset you, sir, boss. I ain't gonna do nothing. I say exactly what you want me to say. I say whatever you want me to say. You bunch of worthless pieces of horse manure. But for those of us who were raised under these types of examples, that's why we don't have that cowardice that you have. And the day I wake up with that kind of cowardice, I hope I stop breathing. I don't even want to live being that kind of coward. So that's what happened. And I mentioned, with the infusion of experienced organizers, these events that happen, along with showing up here in Sacramento on the west steps of the state house Capitol building with guns to protest the legislation that was introduced in 1967 by Marin County. Marin County's, if you go over the Golden Gate Bridge north from San Francisco, you're in Marin County. It's the richest county in all of California, and of course, California is easily the richest state in all of the U.S. And the U.S. is easily, unfortunately, the richest country in the world. So that tells you what kind of money you're looking at in Marin County. Every time when I was in high school, I'd drive over there to Marin County, I'd get pulled over. Every single time. We would bet on it. How long is it going to take us to get pulled over in Marin County? We just do it. But anyway, this Don Mulford, who was a state senator from Marin County, introduced a bill making it illegal to open carry weapons in California, and that bill was specifically targeted against the Black Panther Party for self-defense, and it was supported by the National Rifle Association, the NRA. It was supported by Ronald Reagan, who was the governor of California then. So don't let these crackers fool you. They don't. They were 100% for gun control when it meant our people carrying guns and going up against racist Gestapo police. So they're not for no Second Amendment. Second Amendment ain't even about that. That was a document that was created. The Second Amendment I'm talking about, to arm the slave patrols against us. You read it, you find out that we've done shows on it here. We've talked about it extensively. So that has nothing to do with that. These people are just interested in maintaining their control. They don't care about any democratic rights, or there's no such thing in this society. So the Black Panther Party was, without question, able to grow because of all of these incidents, the imprisonment of Huey P. Newton, the Panthers growing as a national organization and eventually an international organization. And as a result, they captured the imagination through a lot of their social programs. You see a picture on the screen of the free breakfast program that they had originally in Oakland, and then they had one in Seattle, Portland, and LA, and then it became a nationwide thing. They had it in 30 something cities. And at the time that they did that, there was no such thing as free breakfast or lunch in schools. Those programs were created in the public school system with the intent of undermining this effort that was made by the Black Panther Party. And when I had the opportunity with the APRP chapter in Oregon to initiate a free breakfast program in the New Columbia neighborhood in North Portland several years ago, we made that a part of our political education, is informing the parents. We go door to door informing the parents that we send your kids to our free breakfast, and they'll get education, they'll get nurturing. And we had a lot of indigenous kids that came through, a lot of European kids, Asian kids, all kind of kids would come through, and the parents would come and just hang out. And that's, the type of model that the Black Panthers provided with their work. And they even, a lot of the institutions they created, I mentioned about the free breakfast, but a lot of clinics that created, like I know in Portland, the dental clinic that exists there today down by the Willamette River, still in operation today. It's a private, I don't know if it's private or public, but it was the clinic that the Black Panther Party started in Portland, but it's still operational today under someone else. And, a good brother, good friend, and good big brother, Mr. Kent Ford there in Portland, who I hope my brother is doing well. A lot of times he listens to this program. So if you hear this, Brother Kent, I'm thinking of you always. I'm going to come up there and spend some time with you as soon as I possibly can. But he was one of the people that started that program up there. All of those programs in Portland. These are the kind of people that we respect. You respect these politicians and these people, and more, do whatever you want to do. But we're not talking about no. I can't remember the sister's name in Georgia, who's a politician, Stacey Abrams, and the other one, Warnock, and Kamala Harris, and these are your leaders. Those aren't our leaders. Okay, our leaders are revolutionaries. You have whoever you want, but we're raising up the people who stood uncompromisingly for our liberation, and we are inspired by that to continue to work for our liberation. And the Black Panther Party, influenced by the work in Africa, influenced by the work in Alabama, in Oakland, we continue to be inspired by them. We continue to be inspired by all of the work that they did. We have always had our sister Sada Shakur embedded in our hearts, in our minds, and she will continue to be there. She defeated U.S. imperialism. That's why they're so angry. That's why they had her on there. She's the only woman to ever be on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, and she's the first person on there. The only reason why she's coming off now is because she's no longer physically with us. But they were never able to get her. And so the last thing we want you to remember about that is that she stood uncompromisingly against this empire, and she was able to be there and safe because of the socialist Cuban Revolution. Thank you. So we just want to say too that we talked about the liberation movements. These approaches will continue to provide us capacity to be free. And like, for example, the Festival International Pan-African Day, the conference happening next month in Africa, African youth. The APRP is sending a number of youth there from all over Africa, Europe, all over this backward empire. These efforts are the legacy of the flyer you see on the screen. What's happening last, and you see there on the flyer, there are many of these freedom fighters on there that we're talking about. Many people we've mentioned. There are Black Panther Party members in that photo. But our point is that these efforts to organize our people on an international level, this is the legacy of the Black Panther Party. So we are honored and respect our comrades for all their contributions, and we humbly do our best to continue that work. So we thank you. We ask you to join us next week, October 5th. Our topic will be there's zero empathy for those who work against us. Yeah, we don't want to hear that nonsense. I'll give you the same level of empathy that you give me. But if you are if you are putting out there propaganda that's designed to undermine our efforts to be a peace and justice loving people, then the hell with you. I don't give. I care about you the same level you care about me. Not at all. And that's what we're going to talk about next week because a lot of our people are, you know, some of us are opportunists, but a lot of us are just genuinely confused. So join us next week. The red and white QR code, as always, has all the APRP programs, Forward Ever Shop, and hoodcommunist.org. So check that out. If you're in the Sacramento area, we continue to invite you to attend our free self-defense classes every Thursday night, 2775 Cottage Way, number 15, 6 to 8 p.m. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to pay anything. You just have to come and bring a positive spirit. So come on through. You're welcome. And join the APRP, aprp-intl.org, and the black and white QR code in the bottom right. Many of our youth organizers there in Burkina Faso and Niger will be at that FIPON conference. So support their efforts to bring work study books, revolutionary literature to the Sahel region in Africa. So become a monthly sponsor so you can do that. Whatever you can sponsor each month is appreciated. And then buy my book, A Guide for Organized Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. I know a lot of you have already bought it, but please, if you could make an effort to tell people about it who haven't bought it, right? It's a good book. You have it. You've looked through it. Even if you just thumb through it, you know it's a worthwhile book for $8 US. You can only get it on Amazon, unfortunately. But 100% of the proceeds go towards anti-fascist work. I just bought some pads that I used in self-defense last Thursday so that people could practice blocks that I've taught them. So this is how I use the money I get from selling books. So please help buy some books, tell people about the books. Forward ever, backwards never. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay strong.